Good evening and welcome to Facing Teaching in Muncie and Delaware County. Thank you so much for coming out this evening to be a part of the show. I'm J.R. Jameson. I'm the co-founder of the Facing Project. If you have never been to a Facing Project show before or heard of the organization, I want to tell you a little bit about it because the name isn't super intuitive. So the Facing Project is a 501c3 nonprofit that connects people through stories to strengthen communities. We're headquartered right here in Muncie, Indiana, but we work nationally. We operate in close to 100 communities across the country, and we've done 12 projects here in Muncie, Indiana. Our first project was in 2012 called Facing Poverty, and this latest project, Facing Teaching. The Facing Project model pairs writers with storytellers to bring narratives to life, and then we work with actors to bring those stories to life on stage. Oftentimes people say that we're an oral history project. In fact, the Huffington Post called us one of 3 oral history projects to watch. And so occasionally we'll quote that, because if the Huffington Post calls you an oral history project, you go ahead and put it in your publicity documents, right? But we're so much more than that. It's all about listening and about connections. We train all writers across the country on our model. And that model is to sit down with a storyteller who has said, I have a story to share, and I'd like to share it. And that writer and storyteller sits down together, and they get to know each other. They have a conversation as 2 people in the same community around a specific topic. Sometimes those conversations can take 3 hours, sometimes they can take 4 hours, sometimes they take as little as an hour. It just depends on the relationship between writer and storyteller. And then what happens is the writer goes back to their home or a coffee shop, and they listen to the recording of the conversation they had with the storyteller, and they begin to craft a narrative in 1,000 words or less that really pulls out themes of that individual's life pertaining to the particular topic. And then the writer goes back to the storyteller and says, what do you think about the story? And a lot of times the storytellers say, I hate it. and that's actually a true story. That's happened to me many times as a writer. And so then you have to begin to ask the question, well, what isn't right about this story? And the storytellers will often say, well, it doesn't sound like me because I would never use this word or say that word. So then it should become a collaboration. So the story brings on the life of both folks. And then after that, we put it in a book, and then we work with, here in Muncie Civic Theater, for actors to take those stories and bring them to life on stage, much like you'll see tonight. Now, we believe that everybody can tell their own story. So we've been questioned before, do you feel like people can't tell their own story? That's not it at all. Our mission is steeped in connections, connection from storyteller to writer to actor, to being on live on stage and audience members connecting with those stories. And then after that, those stories being spread throughout the community to create conversations. Sometimes it's conversations about change. What can we learn from our own narratives? Sometimes it's conversations about, can stories influence policy? We had a project in Atlanta, Georgia, where they partnered with the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport to create a kiosk. Their project was on human trafficking, so that individuals flying through the airport could put headphones on, listen to those Facing Project stories, and pick up information. What do you do if you spot human trafficking while you're traveling? How do you alert authorities? So for that, it was an awareness piece. When we did Facing Autism here in Muncie, the state police adopted that book. It's now used with officers when they go through training to understand how to work with families who may have a child on the spectrum if they're entering a home. So those are the ways that we want to see stories used. So to that we say we're so much more than an oral history. The stories are storytellers' truths. We don't fact check the stories. We ask people to share their story with us, and those are the stories that we share. We are careful about third parties because we don't want anyone to feel like they've been thrown under the bus, but they're the storytellers' truths. We always say that the stories are a way to start with a discussion. A good story should just pull you into a person's life and spit you back out. You should have more questions after you read a story, after you hear a story. A story shouldn't give you all the answers. And certainly tonight, you won't get all the answers that you may have after hearing these stories. You may have questions, and that's a good thing because we'll have opportunities we'll talk about later for you to engage in these stories and discussions that we'll hold throughout this community. Oftentimes, folks feel that the Facing Project, because I co-founded it with Kelsey Timmerman, that we're the two people because we're often the faces, but that actually isn't true. We have a huge team behind us to help make these stories a reality. In fact, we have about 7,500 people across the country who have been writers, storytellers, actors, artists, community organizers to help bring stories to life. We have about 1,500 stories in our catalog from coast to coast, and that's really exciting to think about. And here in Muncie, we have about 1,000 people who have been engaged in the Facing Project as writer, storyteller, artist, actor, organizer. If you're one of those individuals who has served in that type of capacity and you're able and willing to do so, please stand just to be recognized. Thank you for that. We also have a strong board behind us, and I want to recognize them. Not all of them could be here tonight. Our board chair, Jay Mormon. We have Stephanie Fisher. We have James Mitchell, if you want to give a wave, James, I know you're here. And Ro Selvey, down below, Ro. You'll get to hear more from her later on. I like Ro. She's a Spitfire. She keeps me on my toes. We also have a videographer tonight who has donated his services so that this production could live on. So Matthias Miles, who's up there, you can't see waving, is a freshman at Ball State, TCOM major, who was so interested in the project, and he had a conversation with Ro that he said, hey, I'll donate my services to this so that we can have this videoed so that these stories can live on in a multimedia capacity. So thank you, Miles. Yay. We also could not do the work that we do without generous sponsors. And here in our community, we have great folks who come together to say, we want to get behind you and sponsor your projects. For this particular project, we want to recognize the Community Foundation of Muncie and Delaware County, the Community Champions Fund, Stallings Wealth Management, Cornerstone Center for the Arts, Muncie Civic Theater, and Nash FM. Here locally, as we've grown nationally as an organization, we need a core group of people to help lead the local projects. So what we've done in the last year is create a local steering committee, of which they then divide in half, and half of the committee takes on one project, the other half takes on another to equal the two projects we do each year. For 2018, those projects are Facing Teaching, the one that you'll experience tonight, and Facing LGBTQ Pride, which will come out in June. And I want to give a shout out to all of the folks on that steering committee, because without them, what you're witnessing, what you'll experience tonight could not be possible. And if you are willing and able to stand or wave when you're recognized, please do so. Maud Jennings. Yay. Renee Mays, Kim McKenzie, G. Patterson, C. Annette Payne, Ro Selvey again. You're the star of the show tonight. Caroline Seiler, there she is in the back. Woo. She also helped with Reg. Susan Volbrecht. Susan. Jay Zimmerman. And last but not least, I want to bring up Lynn Stallings, who was the chair for Facing Teaching.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for this debut of the Facing Teaching Project. I've been looking forward to this. This project and evening is to honor the teachers and educators in Delaware County and to give teachers and stakeholders a voice in the conversation that is education in Delaware County. I had the honor of serving on the ISTEP panel a couple years ago, I guess. And from that, what became most clear to me is the need for more conversations and to include more people in the conversations. So when Kelsey asked a bunch of us, what should we do next? I sheepishly stood up and said, hey, what about teaching? I didn't know where it would come or go, I guess, and here we are. So in this Facing Teaching project, we wanted to explore the joys, hopes, and realities of teaching here in Delaware County. And we're here to celebrate the people who enrich our students' lives and make our world better by doing so. Because as we know, it's all about the kids. So with that in mind, if you are or have been a teacher, I'm going to ask you to please stand and stay standing. Thank you. If you are or have worked in schools in any capacity, please stand and stay standing. Thank you. If you champion the children of our communities in any way, please stand and stay standing. Thanks. Look around you. Look to your left, to your right, in front of you, behind you. You are seeing the people who will keep the dialogue going from this evening. We thank you all for your service to our students, our schools, and our communities. Thank you. You can have a seat. With all of the news about education over the past several years, we anticipated that the stories told would not only highlight the joys and hopes of teaching, but the realities and challenges that teachers face on a daily basis and throughout their careers. And there's no doubt we got so much more. But in reality, when we recruit stories, we don't know what we're going to get. The stories you will hear tonight, and all of the stories in our Facing Teaching book, are the teacher's truths. In many ways, they mirror a school day. Teachers begin a day with hope. But as the day goes on, there can be challenges. Hopefully, at the end of the day, and I think they do, teachers find the ways to address those challenges. And they do what's best for our kids so they can start the next day with hope again. And while individuals told these stories, there's no doubt that the themes here are common human ones that transcend school communities throughout our county, not just our county, but our state and our country. We have a choice in how we listen to those stories. Do we dismiss them? Do we take them personally or stop listening? Or, hopefully, do we hear them and the concerns that are raised? Add our perspective to the conversation and think or talk about what's needed that will change the narrative around our children, our schools, and our communities. Together, if we take the time to listen and digest these stories, and the countless others that haven't yet been told, there's only 20 here, we can make a difference that is so needed for our students and our schools and our communities. So, without further hesitation, it's time to turn it over to the real reason we're all here. So take a listen, and then let us know what you think. Thank you.
Embarrassing moments led to a breakthrough. I'm Debbie Gertman, and this is Deana's story as told to Carolyn Seiler. Growing up, I never realized how human a teacher is in their lives and in the lives of their students. The first time I realized the humanity of one of my own teachers was in the 7th grade. It was a real shock. I went to see my brother, who worked in the local grocery store, and saw one of my teachers. In her hands, toilet paper. I was mortified. I looked away as fast as I could. I was so embarrassed. When I got home, exasperated, I told my mom what I saw. She shook her head and said, "Deana, you need to mellow out. You needed to see that, didn't you?" She was right. I did need to see that. I grew up in a small town and was raised by two parents who taught me to give teachers the utmost respect. I was taught to never question them and expected to only say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am in their presence. I never thought about the fact that they, too, were as human as I was. I never thought that I could relate to my teachers. From that point on, I realized that it was silly for me to have put my teachers up on such an unrealistic pedestal. Funny enough, the teacher that I had seen at the store became my favorite teacher. And as I worked through college and became a teacher myself, I modeled my teaching off of her. In class, she always wrote us little notes in the margins of our papers. We started a dialogue in my papers, and with time, we were able to see more of our similarities than differences. It was nice to see how we related in life and to learn we had been through some of the same things in high school and life in general. I kept every paper I ever wrote for her class. Her gesture always stuck with me. I find myself now writing in the margins of my own students' papers so they can have those personal moments with me too. Little did I know that this lesson of vulnerability from my favorite teacher would be applied in a much different way in the future for one of my biology classes. When I first became a teacher, I wanted to be and seem as professional as possible. As time went on, I mastered the content and became more comfortable, which was exciting, but wanted to find a way to have a better individual relationships with my students. One day, I was playing an episode of Forensic Files. At this time, we were still using VCRs. So I started the tape and began giving instructions while the introduction played in the background, just as I had done so many times before. But this time was different. As I was speaking, my students were completely riveted by the TV. I looked around the room and there were students who began to laugh. Others, they're horrified or in total shock. Confused, I looked behind me and saw that what was playing on the TV was not Forensic Files, but a video of me singing a song years ago. In the video, I was wearing a ball cap backwards with my glasses on and no makeup on as the camera was close up to my face. None of my students had ever seen me look so silly in my life. Mortified, I shut the TV off as fast as I could while my students lost it. Oh, I ducked behind my lab desk, not knowing how to recover from such an embarrassing moment. And after a few minutes, I stood up with my face bright red and not yet sure how to face my class. A boy then got up out of his chair and hugged me and said, "I so needed that today." I was having the worst day of my life, and now it is turning out to be the best day. That moment was my connector for that year and that class. Before that moment, I was known as the intimidating teacher because I always asked questions to try to figure out how much a student really knew. And for a lot of students, that is scary because no one likes to be wrong or give the wrong answer. For the rest of the year, that class knew if they gave the wrong answer, it was okay because they had seen that I can embarrass myself and recover from it, so they could too. They were happy to know that they were not judged. The story soon became a piece of folklore in the school that new students year after year heard about. The vulnerability from my embarrassing moment paid itself forward 1,000,000 times, and I'm thankful for that. I've realized that sometimes I'm the only person who has told a kid all day to have a good day, or I may be the only person giving a student positive attention. Kids just want to feel safe. And if for 90 minutes a day, my students feel that no one is going to make fun of them or point out their weaknesses while they're learning, I've done my job. Thank you.
The difference between fate and choice. Hi, I'm Amy Zichkowski, and I will be telling the story of Holly Mosier's story as told to Janae Sander. What is the Medicaid card doing up on the screen? In that moment, I realized we came from different worlds. And it was a moment for a great lesson, but not just for my students. We were studying state flags. I had no real experience with poverty, not at that time. I know a lot more now, even if I'm always learning. The emblem of the state Indiana flag is on Medicaid cards. The state flag lesson became much more than learning about states. I learned that these kids did not know anyone in their neighborhood or home life who did not have a Medicaid card. My kids could not comprehend how I did not know what the card looks like or how someone could go to a doctor's visit without having one. My kids taught me that teachers are different from other adults in their life. Teachers have insurance. Teachers are clean. Teachers have money. Teachers have all this because they are lucky. It's so ironic that my kids view teachers this way because from my perspective, this is beyond a doubt some of the hardest work for the least pay. We have such different perspectives, me and my kids. That's one of my main jobs. Bridging the gap. My job is all about bridging the gap, and it's not just a job. It's who I am. I am a special education teacher, a mediator, a counselor, a nurse, a mother, a boss, a social worker, and an advocate. And that's just at work. I have a family at home too. They help me stay balanced, and I am so fortunate. Some younger teachers don't have that, and this job becomes everything. And if that's how it is, it's too much. I'm pushy and I'm passionate. It's what is hardest and also most compelling about being a teacher. Sometimes I bridge the gap between where things are and where the kid or family can imagine the future. I put me into this job, and it takes a toll. Every day I show up. Every day, I am the link between the school curriculum and what my kids need in order to learn it. I connect parents to resources, kids to services, and rally other safe adults to get involved to offer support for these families. I push parents to dial it up if they need to do more, or dial it back if they're doing too much. My goal is to be the difference between an outcome of fate and an outcome of choice. What makes me so happy is when I see the outcomes of my kids making it across the stage and earning a high school diploma, or having a job in the community. I love it when they see me and show me their successes just by working a job somewhere. That means they're making it. The flip side is what crushes me. I see my former students in the arrest log, or listed as runaway, or with some domestic charge. I try so hard to do everything to help each and every one of them be successful. If they don't make it, I ask myself, what did I not do? Who did I not convince to intervene? What resource did I overlook? Sometimes there's just not enough to go around for everyone who needs help. I don't want my kids to fail because I didn't advocate enough. Maybe they need a lot, but I don't want any of my kids to have a bad outcome just because I wasn't pushing hard enough to help them or get them more help. It's hard to convey how much I love special education or how much the kids keep me going. I have thought about leaving. I even wrote a resignation letter. Then I cried. I know for some kids, I'm possibly the person making a difference for them. Who would do that if I don't? Who would help Mikey with his mom? Who would call probation and advocate for services? Or who would call DCS again and make sure this girl is not avoiding baths to keep her mother's boyfriend's hands off of her? I know these kids. They are my kids. Every year I think, maybe when I send this group off, I'll be done. But then I know someone's little brother will be coming in 2 years. I want to be there for him. Or I know a whole group of kids in the same grade as my own child will be showing up. I just can't leave them with someone I don't know. Who will do what I do for them? These are all my kids. Across the wide range of families and situations, I give myself to all of them. Some of them get more of me than others. The ones who need me get more. That's the nature of special education. It's all about leveling the field and bridging the gap. Sometimes I do that for a university professor's child who is headed to college. Sometimes it's for a teenager who was escorted out of the building by the police for dealing drugs in my classroom. And that one might already be a ward of the state. It's still me giving what I am and all of me to them, all the same. It's so much more than just teaching. It's phone calls to DCS. It's petitions and appeals to insurance companies or doctors to help families obtain insurance coverage for special needs device. For some, I am a mom figure. For others, they have a great mom and don't need me for that, but they need me to push them just a bit extra as their teacher. So that's the me they get. I've been doing this for a while. I still love learning about disabilities. It thrills me to find a new way to interact, or a new strategy for learning, or a new perspective that can help my kids. So when I think about my kids, I feel excitement, caring, and love. I want these kids to make it more than anything. I am doing what I love, and I love working with the kids I do this for. When I look around the state or legislative decisions or think about what public seems to think about public education, I feel defeat. I feel frustration. I feel I have no voice. I can only fight so many fights. I fight poverty, culture, life circumstances, and even parents sometimes. And I fight the disability. I am so lucky that I have what I need from my districts in terms of support. I am surrounded with people in my life who support me as a public educator as well. So I'll go ahead and pick up the next group. Thank you.
Do I want to be a teacher? I'm Kara Norwood, telling an anonymous story as told by Andrea Eads. I knew I liked biology and could enjoy doing anything with it. It was later that I realized that I loved sharing about it with kids. On the hard days, I think I could be working in a lab, by myself, with quiet specimens, without all the stresses. I worked in the Nature Center at Calvin College, where I did my undergrad. I gave tours, usually to younger kids, but one time to a 5th grade class. I thought that was so fun. Sharing with them, exploring with them, answering their questions, teaching them. So when I needed a job, I tried working at the Boys and Girls Club doing STEM activities. Then I decided to apply to be a Woodrow Wilson Fellow at Ball State. It meant a 1-year intensive program to get my teaching license and a 3-year commitment to teach in a high-needs school. After a summer of concentrated classes, I was paired up with a teacher at a local middle school to teach 7th and 8th grade science. I like that age. High schoolers can think they are too cool. Young elementary kids can be all over the place crazy. But middle school is my kind of crazy. I like teasing, challenging, bantering with them. The content they need to learn isn't so advanced, so I can be creative and have fun with them. Before I even started in the classroom, I got a feeling for what it meant to be a teacher there. I went to lunch with a group of teachers during a teacher in-service training. At the restaurant, a parent started chiding and complaining to the teachers about how Southside was a rebel school, no place for panthers. There was tension. Some students brought the outside pressures and divisions with them. A rebel flag t-shirt, ring, folder. Most times the kids got along, but other times you could just sense a fight coming. Someone was going to get punched. The teachers were holding the school together. The teachers leaned on each other. They had a close connection. The administration seemed fine to me. I felt supported in the classroom. But you didn't get that same feeling from those who had been there a while. I heard murmurs of feeling abused, unappreciated. The year I started with my mentor teacher teaching, and I assisted. Later, she turned over the reins and I taught. I tried to make it fun, explain things several different ways, so that no matter what kids' learning styles were, they could get it. I didn't use a lot of PowerPoints or lectures. We tried to engage them with experiments and discussions. Sometimes that worked. Like, even if they didn't care that much about buoyancy now, I hoped they would remember how the submarine we made floated in salt water and sunk in fresh. We wanted to make it interesting and be available to answer questions and help on assignments with everyone. But too often we had to give our attention to whoever was acting out, and the quiet student sitting, waiting, never got their question answered or their work checked. I know that the students need 21st century skills to be self-initiators, to use technology on their own, but many days only 5 out of 30 would have their iPads with them, or they kept getting kicked off the internet because there wasn't enough broadband to sustain that many devices. Teachers were dealing with their own stresses. Talking about contracts, job searches, it feels hard to stay motivated when morale is down. I don't know what to do differently, and I know public schools are important in so many ways. Like, I remember the day I was walking down the hall and saw an occupational therapist showing a blind student how to use a cane. I'd never thought of that before. I hadn't thought about all the services students can find at the school. The food pantry is great. Students who are dreading an empty refrigerator at home can bring home a sack of food for the weekend. And students with special needs learn skills and responsibility helping organize and stock the pantry. I watched and wanted to emulate the teacher across the hall from me, the way students lingered after an extracurricular club just to have a relationship and a connection with her. I don't know if I want to work in a classroom setting for long. Maybe in a state park or nature center. I love being outside. Besides, it's hard to hear teachers that have taught for years complaining and wanting out, and then to think that I want to do this for my career. Thank you.
It's hard to teach when you have to pay the bills, or when you can't pay the bills. By Pat McGrory, read by Bill Inman, Pat McGrory, as told to Matt C. Bloom. I came home and my wife was crying. It was September 2017. My wife had been going over our budget, which was always tight, and reading the story in the paper about how we were all going to have to pay back 2 years' worth of back insurance premiums for the whole year. I told her, it'll hurt, but we'll get through it. Then she decided to post on Facebook about how hard it was on our family budget. And I was like, oh, whoa, I think that's a little bit too public to be going out with information like that. But then the next day, I went into work. I'd missed the last staff meeting because I was teaching practice. As one of the few male teachers, I coach all the male sports. I found out my boss had told everyone our student learning objectives, or SLOs, had been too low. Now we need to hit 70% to be considered effective. 70%. Okay, let me explain. There are 2 SLOs we need to hit. One is a measurement of the whole class, and one is a measurement of a single group of about 6 kids. 70% proficiency doesn't seem so bad, right? You're thinking, that's a C. All right. That doesn't seem too tough. But then when you consider that the statewide average for I-STEP is 51%, you start to see how impossible it feels. I had remained stalwart through all the contract disputes and the state takeover turmoil. I had remained committed to my community and the children that are its future, even though I hadn't had a raise in the whole time I'd been there. And it didn't seem like that was going to change anytime soon. I'd even felt pretty solid through the idea that I would have to pay back insurance premiums for the past 2 years. For some reason, the SLOs felt like the straw that broke the camel's back. That was a rough day, but I didn't quit. I have too many reasons to stay, including why I started in the first place. About 10 years ago, my wife and I moved into the South Central neighborhood to join the Ministry of Urban Light Community Church as residents. We made a commitment right then to stay long enough to help raise up the next generation of leaders from the south side of Muncie. We've had 2 kids here. I taught Sunday school. I got frustrated because half an hour a week with these kids just wasn't enough time to feel like I was really making a difference. So I asked God several times if he wanted me to go back to school and become a teacher. Eventually, he said yes. After getting my degree from Ball State and teaching, after getting my degree at Ball State, teaching for our local schools just seemed to fit. I already knew a lot of the teachers from my practicum work. Besides, I was committed to the South Side. So I went to work at a local elementary school. I'm in my 5th year. I love my job. I work with some amazing teachers doing awesome work. They're doing such amazing things for our students. There's a ton of good in our schools to talk about, but we don't talk about it because we're just under so much pressure. The thing I hear most often from teachers, especially those who've been teaching for 25 or 30 years, is that behaviors are worse than ever before. Classroom management is stressful for everybody. You've got little Jimmy over here who can hardly speak or write his name, still poops his pants. You want to help Jimmy, but you get these 2 other kids defying you, trying to embarrass you, who get all the other kids worked up. They feed off that negative energy. Egg it on. You also have content to teach. You want your content to be so engaging that the kids want to learn. That takes a lot of planning. And often, I'm up until midnight or later trying to get it all done. On top of that, you always have to be working toward I-STEP and I-READ, the 3rd grade reading test. You don't have much choice on what to teach. And there's a lot of pressure from above to try to get those benchmarks, which affect your school grades. Drop into all this the stress of struggling to pay your bills. It's crazy to me that I own a house on the south side of Muncie, and I pay like $200 a month for my mortgage. I have no car payments, and even though we live a pretty chaste lifestyle, we're still struggling to get by. We're often waiting on the tax check to make necessary repairs like fixing the fridge. I feel guilty about even going out with some friends to get a beer. When we hear about other school systems that pay $12,000 more a year, it's hard not to be tempted. Can you imagine $1,000 more a month for a family? Oh man. Teachers try not to let all the pressure about all this stuff affect their students at all. We really love them. And most of the time, we're really good at it. We're only human, though. Sometimes it slips through. My wife had emergency surgery a couple years ago. About that time, 2 kids came into the class who were emotionally explosive. One would yell at me and set the other one off. I would go home, be a single dad. Well, single parent. My wife was there, was still with me. She just wasn't with me while my wife was recovering. And then I'd try to get all my work done and come to school and get yelled at again. My fuse was so short. I started yelling back. I knew it wasn't the way to handle this. I just didn't have the emotional resources to get out of the power struggle. We don't always see what happens in each other's classrooms. Are the other teachers experiencing a shorter fuse because of financial stress? I don't know. I don't think many would come right out and say it, but I can make the assumption. After my wife posted on Facebook that we were struggling with our insurance payback, I started to feel okay about it because I thought, why not let everybody know that this is hard? It's really hard. A week or so later, Matt Bloom called me. We've been friends and neighbors for years. He told me he'd seen my wife's post and wanted to see what we could do to help teachers. I felt that whatever we did, it shouldn't be so much about alleviating all the financial burdens so much as boosting teacher morale. As an example, I told him the PTO raised money and gave us all $25 gift cards. That was such a gift to us. It means a lot for my colleagues and I to see that the community sees us and supports us. So, Matt recruited some local businesses to help create a website called MuncieLovesTeachers.com, where teachers can upload a little about themselves and people can make donations to help support their families. I think this is great because it fights what I see as the main problem with the schools right now. In fact, I think during the break you can go and learn more about that website right out here. Both inside Muncie Community Schools and outside in the community, we have a public relations problem. Morale is better when teachers feel valued and supported. Part of that means doing a better job marketing all that our schools offer. When you look at programming, our schools are among the best in the area, hands down. I'm teaching an after-school robotics class this year. How cool is that? These elementary school kids are learning programming, problem solving, comparative development. It's awesome. I'll bet a lot of people have no idea that here in Muncie, that's available to low-income urban kids. The Teachers Association, sorry about that, my tongue's tied. The Teachers Association can help with PR too. These days, too many people look at unions and think they're just greedy. and they don't really do anything for anybody. I don't think that's true about the teachers' unions. Teachers' unions have two functions. One, and these are important for student success. One is to fight against any policies that make it harder for teachers to educate kids or put too much pressure on them. The second is to protect teachers' wages so the school system can attract the best talent. All that ultimately benefits students. Not enough people understand that. Imagine a school system that the community takes pride in because they're amazed at all the teachers accomplish for their students. Imagine a teachers' association that is recognized as fighting for students and providing best-in-class professional development opportunities for teachers. Imagine a faculty that can focus even more on students, free to teach without fear that they won't be able to pay the bills. I think we can get there. For now, my wife will cry sometimes over the bills and our budget. Our kids will be on reduced lunch, and our school will be known primarily as a school system in crisis. We have some work to do, you and I. All this pressure on teachers to relieve it a bit and to better serve the kids. First, all of us in the community have got to believe that we can do better. I do. Do you?
United we teach. I'm Jo Robertson, telling Jenny McGalliard Marsh's story as told by Watasha Barnes Griffin. I was a teacher's kid, and I liked to play teacher, but my father didn't want me to become a teacher. At the end of every school day, I went to his classroom at Yorktown. I would do my homework and play school with the other teachers' kids. At the start of the school year, I would help my mother prepare her kindergarten classroom. I would put up bulletin boards, pack school boxes, make name tags. My father taught art, computers, and the curriculum enrichment program, what they called Yorktown's high ability program back then. He would often have little projects for me after school. I'd sort supplies, reshelve books for him, and help him set up for the next day's classes. I saw how much of their work they brought home, too. And I'm not talking about grading papers. The issues and challenges they faced, that their students faced, I could read them on my parents' faces. I could tell the days when their students struggled, when something in their students' lives was incredibly painful, even devastating. I could tell those times when they had to take action to intervene on a student's behalf, to advocate for a child's welfare, or to celebrate that kiddo's triumph. All of it impacted my parents, which is why my father didn't want me to become a teacher. He thought I would be too empathetic, and I would wear the weight of every student's worries like an albatross around my neck. Now I know he was absolutely right. When my children were little, I ran my own communications consulting business from my home, so I could be there for them. I was very engaged at their school. I volunteered to repair books and shelve them at the library. Sometimes I would volunteer in their classroom. But most of all, I loved volunteering with struggling readers and trying to get them to read at grade level. I started working one-on-one with students. At one point, I worked in a little room with 5 second graders. I so loved how they responded to having an adult who was there helping them because she wanted to be. Well, I never said it. It was as though they knew I could be anywhere, even in my children's classrooms. But I was there helping them because I wanted them to be successful, and they rose to the occasion. In a smaller way, I got to be the teacher I pretended to be as a child. I got to play a small part of each kid's educational journey, just as so many teachers played a part in my own. My parents and very many special teachers in my life instilled in me a lifelong love of learning. My parents are the reason I love reading. Mrs. Nancy Miller showed me that school could be sometimes silly and learning could be a lot of fun. Mrs. Peggy Keller helped me persevere when I felt sure that math and multiplication would be my undoing. Mrs. Marilyn Swander fed my curiosity about the environment and science. Mr. Danny Thornburg fed my love of reading and history. Mrs. Marcia Lusko expanded my world, exposing me to interesting cultures and foods, all while equipping me to be a better student. All of these teachers, and so many more, poured into me and made me who I am today. I think of them often and fondly. I also think of how they're paid. Teachers today are not paid well, and neither were my parents. I saw my parents scrimp and save. More importantly, I saw them never hesitate to buy school supplies for students in need. Sometimes an extra winter coat ended up in the shopping cart for a child who I would never know. Or when my mom wrote the check for my lunch money, she'd write a check for another child whose father had just been laid off. These are the issues that we still deal with today at the United Way, where I'm president and CEO. Currently, in Delaware County, nearly half of our community's households cannot make ends meet. 21% of households live in poverty and qualify for public assistance. In addition to that, 25% of households are barely able to make ends meet. They cannot fully fund their basic budget necessities, let alone set aside savings for an emergency or for asset building, like buying a home. They are living one crisis away from sliding into poverty. Parents face questions like, do they get the car brakes repaired, or do they buy winter coats for the kids? Because there isn't money for both. When we talk to these families about how to best help them, time and time again, the same concern came up: education. Parents lamented that they themselves didn't take full advantage of their education. People worried about their children getting the most out of their educational experience. Consistently, parents and guardians clearly stated they wanted the best for their children, and they wanted their children to have a better life than they themselves currently had. We paired their concern with research that shows that a child's ability to read at 3rd grade is the single greatest predictor of that child's success in school and in life, and focused our efforts on education. Students failing to meet the 3rd grade reading benchmark are 4 times more likely to drop out of high school, 13 times more likely to do so if they live in poverty. When you consider that statistic, that 80% of children in low-income households are not reading at grade level, and nearly half of our country's household are considered low-income and poverty, making sure our community's children are having reading success is a natural turning point for our community's trajectory. United Way realized we could convene volunteers and a coalition of educators and service providers to address these barriers together. And thanks to generous donor support, we could strategically invest in programs that support greater reading outcomes and long-term community change through this work. Working together is the key. We can all come at this with different approaches and agendas, but parents, guardians, families, and students need to know that we're all in this together. Our community has amazing educators, like my parents, who daily face incredible challenges while working hard to meet the needs of their students. They need to feel our community's support. Drop them a note of support, volunteer an hour at the school, and make sure everyone knows that teachers are playing a big role in our children's and our community's success. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this amazing evening filled with real-life stories of heroes that live and work amongst us. I'm Rose Selvey, and I'm a Facing Project board member and a proud MCS educator. Tonight, we are honored also to have here representing two organizations that are dear to teachers, the Back to School Teacher Store and Muncie Loves Teachers. Please stop by, say hello. They both have a table set up at the back. Ask them about what they do, learn more, see how you can help both organizations, and consider making a donation to them. Outside the auditorium, the Facing Project has a table set up, and for a $25 donation tonight, you can do that over the phone. You will receive a Facing Project t-shirt, and we would appreciate that. Also, Muncie's own Guardian Brewery and Muncie's newest bakery, No Crumbs Left Behind, are looking forward to serving you in the back. We will have an 8-minute intermission, after which the lights will be dimmed and curtains will open to continue our event. Enjoy, and thank you for being here.
Hi, I'm Mike Broccoli, and I'm going to read my poem, Aloha Shirt Man Thanks the Students Who Made His School Psychology Career a Gift. In the beginning, I showed you how to scramble blocks. Now, at the end, we amaze ourselves with all the shades of red between burgundy and maroon. I always asked you what you like to do for fun. You'd say search for arrowheads in the fields your father plowed, or maybe ride your bike or play the Oregon Trail. When you picked practicing multiplication, I told you how I cheated on times tests during my St. Gabriel's years, until my mother caught me counting on my fingers. I remember your social studies class on the day your teacher forgot Indonesia was an island, and the time you taught a substitute the difference between lightning and lightning. The relief of holding less when faced with nature's awe. You wore green t-shirts with pink scripted on the front, or sports jerseys with either 18 or 23 silk-screened across the back. I read your recipe for making a peanut butter sandwich, then helped you read The Grapes of Wrath in high school. I saluted your graduation from Legos to Minecraft, to the go-karts and 12 strings you designed the year you wore a homecoming crown. As the school year neared its close, I marveled at the superhero shirts folded atop the lost and found table, and at the silver batons and Colts jackets, and at an unmatched dusty shoe. On my last day, I watched you haul cat-in-the-hat kites to waiting cars. Each of you is a knight or princess who will become the lightning and lightning for all the lives before me. Thank you.
Votes for my students. I'm Rick Zichkowski, and this is Melanie Wright's story as told to Susan Volbrecht. I ran as a state representative because of the educational policy changes that are happening. It's not really something I imagined myself doing until there was no other choice. This was during the General Assembly sessions of 2011, and a bill came up that tied student test scores to teacher evaluation. This pays no mind to students' needs, no mind to the devastating impacts of generational poverty, and no mind to broken testing policies. At the same time, Senate Bill 575 was introduced, which stripped away collective bargaining except for matters of wages and benefits. This deprofessionalizes teachers who care so much more than their paycheck. I wrote to the governor. I wrote to the senator, who was a freshman at the time, and I wrote to my state representative. The senator actually came and met with me in my classroom on a Saturday morning, along with 14 other teachers. He could see we were concerned about what was happening. It went beyond the assessment. My students' anxieties were manifesting themselves as behavioral and social issues as well. He kept me in the dialogue, but never voted for change. My state representative sent me a form letter in June. The session was ended in March. The email I had sent him was not canned. I had sources, there was research, and my students' futures were contained in that letter. When I took that form letter out of the mailbox, I made the decision, I'm running against you. I knew at that point in time that there was no other answer. I quickly found myself in the world of politics, which is not like teaching. In teaching, everyone is collaborative and helps one another. During campaigning, it can be very mean and competitive. The first time I ran, I lost by 444 votes. But I could see so clearly myself doing it. I could envision it, and it felt like I was meant to be. I wanted to bring the voices of my students into the conversations that govern their education. They needed an advocate on location where the future of their schooling is decided. So I ran again. I won by 206 votes. I'm aware of only one other Democrat that won on a state level in Indiana that election, which was 2014. Part of it was my work ethic. I wasn't used to being able to go out and say, I need you to vote for me, and here's what I'm bringing to the table. But I did it. I knocked on doors, and I showed people that I was a multidimensional candidate, but that I believe in public education. I remember how great my public education was, and I felt so prepared for college. And I was the first in my family to go to college. I had to prepare my high school students for what the campaign might bring. I told them, when we get closer to the election, there's going to be mail that comes out against me. I told them to ask any questions because I don't know what that was going to look like. One girl, a second grader, came up and said, my mailbox told me I can't trust you. I said, when you believe in something and you stand up for it, sometimes people will say things about you, and that's what's happening now. I'm still fighting for better assessment legislation. At this moment, we've totally moved away from hands-on learning. Some kids do well at testing, and some don't. Some kids can sit down at a computer and show you what they know, and some can't. We're also shutting down creativity entirely. We stop creative thought early because of testing. We are training them like puppies. Pick the one right answer, not multiple correct answers, not many possible solutions. These are our doctors and lawyers of the future. We've ended imagination and taken away creative playtime, an important developmental stage. I miss the days when we would wrap around a child and support them in their struggles. Now they bring that baggage with them to school. Sometimes it comes out as behavioral issues or shutting down, non-compliance issues. We used to take time and find the cause of the misbehavior and to help them overcome their challenges. Today, everything is so focused on academics, language, arts, and math. As a fine arts teacher, it isn't coming locally. It's a national shift where the arts are less important. If you look back at our great artists, composers, and architects, these are the people who had the most ups and downs in their lives. And they harnessed that and used it to create. Some struggled in school, whereas some had a teacher who helped them to tap into their struggles to develop their talent. How do those students fare during the current standardized assessment battery? The state might not look at each of my students as an artist, but to me, they are each a unique work of art. To me, they are each a Picasso. Thank you.
Mrs. Miller, you set us up. I'm Christy Inman. Barbara's story as told by Clarissa Bowers. Early in my teaching career, I took a course on multicultural education in an effort to bring the world outside a little bit closer to our small town in Indiana. Most of my students had never left the confines of our county, let alone the borders of our country. So I felt like I had a responsibility to bring whatever cultural experience I could into my teaching. Like most teachers, I was dedicated to leaving my students a little better than I had found them. And looking back on it now, that is what kept me going through this experience. During that time in my life, I found myself teaching in one of the rural schools where diversity wasn't something that was regularly experienced. So, like many things that are unfamiliar to us, it wasn't regularly embraced either. Having just spent much of my time working to understand the importance of multicultural acceptance, I chose to do a reading with my 10th graders from the Hiroshima Diary, the journal of a Japanese physician, August 6th through September 30th, 1945, a book written by a doctor that spent his days tending to the victims of the atomic bombing in Japan. As I walked throughout the classroom, I implored my students to feel what these people were feeling and worked my hardest to paint a picture of what they were experiencing. At one point, I felt my own heart break a bit as I read the excerpt, and they had no faces. Their eyes, noses, and mouths had been burned away, and it looked like their ears had melted off. It was hard to tell the front from the back. I paused, expecting to hear the sharp inhale of my students match my own, and was instead rendered speechless as a quiet country kid slumped over in his chair blurted out, "So what? They're the enemy." Years have passed, and I still couldn't tell you what words I found to fill the silence that permeated the room, or how I finished my lesson. Where had I gone wrong in this? I was trying to reach out and teach about humanity and the struggles of other cultures around the world, and here I was, face to face with a student that felt nothing at the thought of these innocent people being maimed. Admittedly, a bit defeated, I spent the next few days trying to find a way to build some sort of cultural connection for my students, but mostly I just needed a connection for one. Simply reading to him hadn't done the trick. I needed to find something to forge a stronger connection. These kids didn't need another adult telling them how to think. Telling them how to think was likely how we got here in the first place. Instead, I chose to meet them on their level. If words weren't going to make them feel something, perhaps a movie could. Over the course of the next week, my students learned to live and love alongside Guido in the 1997 movie Life is Beautiful. The movie tells the story of a goofy Jewish shopkeeper that spends the first half hour finding ways to win over Dora by way of comedic yet romantic gestures and endearing moments. Like most romantic comedies, he eventually does just that, and they end up married with a beautiful son. Unfortunately, World War II breaks out and they are transferred to a concentration camp, where Guido uses his comedic ways as a method for a distraction for his son. Throughout the course of the film, you can't help but fall in love with Guido as he turns each horrific aspect of the concentration camp into a fun game for his boy, each time putting his own safety at risk for the sake of a smile from his son. By the end of the week, the whole class had fallen in love with Guido and his son. They loved his sense of humor. They were glad he got the girl. They couldn't help but adore him for the risks he was willing to take to protect his son from the tragedy that was all around them. Every student was captivated by Guido's story and eager to see the story come to its happy ending. They were finally connecting to another culture despite it being unrelated to their own. In the concluding scene of the film, Guido tells his son to hide in a box until everyone is gone in hopes that a rescue team will find him. With a wink, he comedically steps around the corner with a guard. We see his son laughing while hiding in the box for this one last game. As Guido slips from view for the final time, the only sound that is heard is the wail of a machine gun. In that moment, you could have heard a pin drop. After a short while, the silence was broken by the same boy who was so lacking in compassion before. "Are you kidding me? They killed Guido?" I looked at him and simply said, "What do you care? He's the enemy, right?" In that moment, his face just fell. He had been just as engaged as everyone else, and he said, "Mrs. Miller, you set us up." It was such an incredible moment that even now, I get goosebumps. Here was a kid that, through no fault of his own, was taught that the Japanese were our enemy, and that was all there was to it. How do you consider anything else if that's all you've ever been told? Maybe it was by a grandparent or a great uncle that fought in World War II, but how could you ever know to consider an alternative if an alternative was never offered? I think about that experience often, and I realize how much it has sculpted who I am as an educator. Multicultural education isn't just teaching a story that comes from another country. The idea about providing and creating experiences for kids, authentic experiences that give them a chance to relate to people from other backgrounds, not just other countries, kids that they rival against in sports from across the county, or the kids that just moved in from out of state. Overall, it was really a watershed moment for me to think, who am I teaching? What am I teaching? I realized I'm not just teaching dangling modifiers and prepositions to these kids. That day, I was teaching kids how to think and how to be compassionate. And those aren't standards anywhere. Thank you.
We're not all tall. Lighting the way, I'm Melissa Buckler, telling Nikki Fitzgerald's story as told to Gabriella Fleuler. Just another move, just another school. Nothing fazed me anymore. I caused a lot of trouble in my old life in Florida, and everyone at my new school knew it. Between homelessness and coming from a life of drugs and violence, I had negativity in my heart. I trusted no one. I was disappointed in the move the minute I heard about the new school. It's just another school. Just another group of adults who think they know who I already am. I'm sure they knew some of it. The drugs, the abuse, some things you can't hide. People talk. I was familiar with sneaking around and running from people too. Home life was bad, but the foster system, or being truly alone, they would have been worse. It was a dark time and a dark life. I'm sure they knew things were not the best for me. But they didn't really know. They didn't know about my learning disabilities, as if showing up to school every day being expected to cause trouble wasn't bad enough. Being ADHD and trying to pay attention in a class full of people with those expectations was almost impossible. My grades weren't good. My behavior was bad because they told me it should be. Things weren't good. Mr. Jones changed it all. It's like he knew I needed him, and he took everything people at school thought they knew and turned it upside down. He taught everything in an exciting way for me. He made me get up and move and show what I was thinking, interacting with material, with classmates. I made friends. I spoke my mind. I had things to do with my body while I was learning, so I wasn't sitting still. My mind couldn't sit still. He knew the actual material was easy for me, but focusing long enough to show it was the trick. But he did it. One day, he told me he'd teach me how to referee soccer games for the school. He said he'd pay me, and I could earn money, and we'd have a soccer team. Being involved with the team was amazing. I learned about the game and the rules. I couldn't play on the team because of my behavior at school, but refereeing was close enough. I loved every second. Between refereeing and the fun days in Mr. Jones' class, I was happy. I loved refereeing because I felt like I had an actual control of the situation I was in. I even got to earn money doing it, which was great after growing up with no money to call my own. My behavior improved, and the school administration saw that. Things were better at school. My classes were so easy. With Mr. Jones helping me show the other teachers that I knew the material, I was bored. I decided to go to the guidance counselor and ask to be put in accelerated classes. Nobody asked for more work, they told me. You just want to be social with the older kids. My feelings were hurt. They called my mother. She told them to ask Mr. Jones about my behavior and my learning because she couldn't tell them. Like always, Mr. Jones changed things. He told them how I was learning and how the classes were easy. He told them about my refereeing and how I was responsible in making money and not causing any problems. And they did it. They put me in the advanced classes, first one class, and then, as time went on, they let me in the others when they saw that I actually wanted to learn. I could learn. I was challenged. I was happy. They told me I could participate in sports now. I tried out for the track team, and I got on. Long distance wasn't my thing, but I was really good at hurdles and shot put. I tried the longer races, but they weren't where I could really shine. I loved knowing I earned my place on the track. Mr. Jones' belief in me followed me into 8th grade. I got involved in sports. My grades stayed up. I was in the accelerated classes, and my behavior was always good. I got into Key Club as a high school student, which opened the door for me even more. Mr. Jones constantly advocating for me, standing behind me and seeing that my past didn't have to dictate my future, led to the person I am today. I made it as a homeless child of addiction to graduate college with multiple degrees, win many community service and professional awards, and continue to have a passion for education and learning. As a teacher now, I have been able to take the impact Mr. Jones had on me and pass it on to the students. I view each student as an individual and pour my heart and soul into providing them the greatest education possible, no matter how they learn or where they come from. I hope to be the light for students, the way Mr. Jones was always the light for me. Without him, I would have never made it out of the darkness.
Writing my husband's story, one student at a time. I'm Beth Neri. I'm reading an anonymous story as told to Michael Dane. I've been an elementary school teacher for 42 years, and I loved every minute of it. I never went to work. Monday morning was always, let's see what we can do this week. I'm 66, and you think it's time to slow down a little bit. Times are changing. I want new teachers to be inspired. You know, research shows they only stay with it for about 7 years. Nobody's going to be staying in the field 42 years anymore, and that's a shame. I wasn't getting good at it until I taught for a while. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning, and I apologize to all my students for doing that, but I loved what I did, and I think a key to that was professional development. Teachers have to keep going to be fresh and look for what the kids need, so I always tried to do that. I knew at 6 I wanted to be a teacher. When I was 6, I lined up all my dolls and my teddy bears on the couch, and I read to them. In 4th grade, I made up my own science tests, and I put questions I thought the teacher would ask on them, and if one of my questions was on the test, I gave myself 10 points. Yeah, that's how big a nerd I was about wanting to teach. Well, I graduated in 1972 from Ball State with a kindergarten endorsement, and I got a job the week before school started, about 3 hours away, teaching 2nd grade at Clay City. We'd just gotten married in July, and we had very little money. I had enough to make a mobile for my classroom. That was about it. The first year, the Army would have wanted me. I thought discipline was key. You only talked when teachers talked to you or ask you questions, so the room was very quiet. I had a little room in the basement, which was a little like a dungeon. You could see feet walking by through the windows. But I loved that school because it was, a country school like I'd attended, and the people were a very caring community. The 2nd year, I moved upstairs. I learned a lot. I became pregnant. And my thought then was, would we want our child in my classroom? So there's something about your children that softens you up. My first 5 years were 2nd grade, and I loved it. Then I got pregnant again. My dad offered us an acre of land so we could move back to Delaware County and be closer. I wasn't planning on going back to teaching until our 2nd child was into kindergarten. That lasted a year. I missed the interaction. I missed the kids. I started subbing. I told him I would only sub in K, 1, and 2. So my first calls, of course, were for 5th grade. I learned a lot from subbing. For example, the first day, the principal said, "You're going to have one student who's going to give you trouble, so just get a hold of him and make him a believer, and you'll be fine." So he walked in, sat down, threw an arm over a chair, and I got in his face and I said, "I'm a teacher, not a garbage collector, and I'll take no garbage from you today." And he said, "I haven't done anything yet." And I said, "And you won't." I got no trouble from him the rest of the day. I loved 5th grade because you could talk about current events and they weren't as huggy as the little kids. My husband had gone back to college. He was a Vietnam vet, and when I was at Clay City, he came to help a little boy who had been abused, and he fell in love with that. So he graduated from Indiana State in elementary education too. So when we came up here, built a house, he subbed for the first year, and then he got a job at Eastbrook. He taught 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. After I subbed for a year, I learned there was going to be a 1st grade opening, and the principal selected me to fill it because he thought I was more motherly than the current teacher. She got bumped to 2nd. I felt a little guilty about that. Then I taught at Harrison until they made a K2 building at Gaston. But by 1989, I had had enough. I gave the principal my resignation and said, "I can't do this anymore. I just can't sign busy work for the kids." And that's what it really was. We gave them busy work in the morning so we could meet with them in groups. Some kids never got done, and they shouldn't have to stay in from recess for that. Some kids got done, so you had to give them more. He said, "Well, let me keep your resignation in the drawer, but I heard about this workshop program, which is an alternative to seat work." So my husband and I went. We worked every night till 2 o'clock, getting ready for the next day. But I loved it, and I loved what it was teaching. There was a work board, and the kids just came in and did different activities down the board. If you got done, fine. If you didn't get done, it's okay. It was all practice work we needed to do, but you taught the children to learn how to manage their time. You taught children work ethic. How hard you work affected how far you got. You taught the children it's okay to ask for help, and you taught the children to work wherever they're comfortable. So they no longer sat in chairs and rows, they sat wherever they wanted, and that's where they learned. And the funny thing about it was, there were no discipline problems because the kids were actively engaged about what they wanted to learn. This professional development opportunity was a saving grace for me as a teacher. It gave me a fresh charge which lasted for at least 10 years of wanting to do something different. Next time, the principal took 7 of us to Purdue to be trained at the learning spheres for this multi-aged class. The one I took was K through 3. We went for training to see how to set that up. And on the way home, he said, "Does anybody want to do this?" Another teacher and I looked at each other and said, "Yep, sign us up." As a result of that professional development opportunity, we had the knowledge and the passion to get the program ready and up and running successfully. Parents had to take a leap of faith with us and sign up to be in our class because it was a 3-year commitment. Multi-aged worked like a family, so if I wanted to teach plants, we learned about plants, and then we had all these projects. You knew what level you were. You'd go take something you wanted to do. A kindergarten student could do a 2nd grade project. A 2nd grader could do a kindergarten project. Nobody cared. In fact, when people came to visit, they'd ask, "What grade are you in?" And the kids would say, "I don't know." We didn't have to teach them how to line up to get their lunches. The older kids just showed the younger kids how to do it. And one of the greatest comments for that from our parents' survey was, "We want to thank you for this because you allowed our youngest child to be the youngest in the class, the middle in the family, and the oldest in the family, and nowhere else would they get that experience." We did multi-aged, age K2, for about 10 years. But then my husband, who was a Vietnam vet, passed away after a long illness. And I wanted to write his story. But I realized I couldn't. I didn't know how. So I went to my principal again and I said, "I want to take a professional development conference July 15. I don't care what it's on." And she said, "Well, this writing one came across my desk this morning." Writing? Oh my goodness, I'm not that good at writing. I'll do it, because I want to write his story. I didn't realize it was about how to teach writing to children. It was a week-long workshop through Ball State English department called Open Institute. I took that, and I was mesmerized about writing and how to do it, how to use children's picture books to teach writing, K through college. It was awesome. So I finally wrote my husband's story, which was very rewarding. And I put in place the writing workshop that fall, and my kids have never been the same since. If we had to miss writing time for a convocation, they would beg to do it at recess. Nothing in the world like that had ever happened before. So the next year, I took the next course, which was for 4 weeks, and I became a teacher consultant. And that's kept my fire going for the last 10 years. I started a writing camp at elementary school in 2007 because of that training. It's basically for grades 3 through 5, but if there are openings, we'll accept 2nd graders. The kids write and learn about the craft of writing, and it ends with a celebration where they read their work and they create an anthology. I found it personally rewarding this year when a 5th grader, Miss Ella, wrote, "We're too blessed to be stressed." And I was a worrier, so now every time I worry, I just think of that. And to this day, I will remember her, what she taught us. All of this happened because I went through that professional development training for 4 weeks that summer. My fear is I was probably the last or next to last group to go through it because now schools are on a balanced schedule. And a teacher's summer is already so short, it's asking an awful lot for them to take that much time out during the summer. When you try after-school professional development during the school year, teachers are tired. There's got to be a better way for professional development to happen because you need it. I don't care what you have a passion for. We have a teacher who has a passion for gardening, but whatever it is, you will bring that passion to the classroom. So recharging your batteries is important. It certainly was for me. My advice for teachers is love what you do. Then it's not a chore to go to work. And if you don't want it, please save the kids and get out because they deserve good teachers. I understand it's hard when we're not getting the funding or when we're not getting the encouragement. There's so many troubled kids and family situations. It's heart-wrenching. And now you're doing more than just reading and teaching. They're piling more on you. I don't want to say it's sometimes a thankless job because in my area, they are so wonderful and a little appreciation will go a long way. But I do think the professional development is key. Technology is wonderful, and kids are learning a lot from technology, but we need to teach kids how to listen. Teaching cooperative learning and using a project-based curriculum makes them listen to each other. Project-based gets the kids involved, lets them do little projects, applaud their successes, applaud their failures, because more can be learned from the act of failing than succeeding. And then they stop thinking they have to be perfect every time. If they don't know how to listen to each other, there won't be successful marriages or jobs or anything. So devices are good, but you need people skills too. It is certainly not a thankless job. They often won't remember exactly what you taught them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And that's what life's all about. So be positive. There's already too much negative in the world, and kids are being piled on more than ever. You have to embrace your opportunities to keep yourself fresh and passionate as a teacher. I took advantage of and I was able to continually explore new ways to approach teaching. As a result, I could finally write my husband's story. Even better, I knew how to teach generations of students how to tell theirs. Thank you.
Let's say thank you to all our wonderful Muncie Civic actors. We would also like to give another thank you to our sponsors, the Community Foundation of Muncie and Delaware County, the Community Champions Fund, Stallings Wealth Management, Cornerstone Center for the Arts, Muncie Civic Theater, and Nash FM. Just a reminder, we have TCOM freshman Matthias Miles here, and he would like to capture the reactions of audience members if possible. So if you were moved by tonight's performance and you see him in the lobby, please make time to talk with him. These stories are the beginning of a conversation around the issues raised in the stories tonight. In the coming weeks, you'll see opportunities for additional facilitated conversations, and you'll also get a post survey. If you'd like to get started helping right away, please stop and talk to Muncie Loves Teachers and the Back to School Teacher Store. Thank you.
I just want to add just a couple things. Thank you again. I hope you were inspired. I hope you're thinking of all the issues. These are just 10 stories, right? So there's 10 more in the book. You can imagine how many more issues are going to come up. And there's lots of stories that haven't been told that we need to listen to. I want to reiterate that these stories were from all over Delaware County as well. If you are an actor, a storyteller, or a writer, we would love to capture a group photo afterwards, so if you could come up here, we could do that. And I also wanted to recognize one last group of people, any elected officials who are here, who are going to hear these stories and help us, make a difference. Could you please stand for us so we can thank you? Thanks again for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. Please spread the word. If there's anybody you think might enjoy the book, please take a copy for them and, pass it along. That would be great. Thank you.